and take care of it. It's just not appropriate in some contexts. So I think that's more of a policy level issue that should be discussed with
But I bring it up here because, we are directly related to we encourage communication and feedback regarding this project. Whether we like the feedback or not, I have no problem with that. But when you attack me personally on something that did not relate to this project and make comments that have no business being there, then I take issue with it. And I'm doing it while we're being recorded here for the public to see. So, Ken.
I don't believe that it takes board action in order for that decision to be made to remove distasteful or inappropriate material. And who's the webmaster on it?
A2S. Yeah.
We have control. I think we, as Joel said, we've never deleted any comment before, and I brought it to Mr. Campbell's attention immediately when it happened, and we talked and agreed that it was inappropriate, and agreed that we should work with Joel to get a policy so that we aren't accused of just censoring content.
That's right.
I
think you should just delete it. I don't think it takes 2 months of board action to delete an offensive comment. Delete it, and if you still need to get the policy changed, get it changed, but I don't think anyone would fault you for it.
I would also suggest you find a way of noting it, that distasteful comments will not be tolerated. Sure. And just so you all know going forward, that you find a way of saying that, yep. that covers a lot of bases, that it just won't be tolerated. It's not a place for it. Plus, there's also liabilities. If we're a public entity, somebody might be slandered, or if it's published, libeled, and we have to be aware of that and not participate in that.
All right, I think we've got the message there. I don't want to be accused of censoring something without at least, and I can understand their position of, oversight. I think, what's appropriate, and I think we'll work on it. And with that, do we have anything else?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, we're motion to adjourn. All right, we're adjourned.
29th, 2020 to order. Roll call, please.
Orboom?
Here.
Breitling?
Here.
Campbell?
Here.
Reddinger?
Here.
Hendrickson? Judd? Mongeau?
Here.
Olson? Peterson? Shirley?
Here.
Strand?
Here.
Zimmerman?
Great, thank you all for being here. You have before you the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. On to item number 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Motion to approve, or if there's any changes or corrections.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor of approving the minutes of the previous meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And moving on to item number 4, the property acquisition status report, item B, pages 10 through 19 in your packet. Take it away, Eric.
Good afternoon. In your packet here, mine is stapled separately, yours probably is too, it looks like. The usual report showing our property acquisition status for this month. This is as of about a week ago. As usual, first page is kind of more of an index. The second page is the overall map showing how we're tracking. As usual, we've acquired another handful of properties over the last month. I believe there was 5 additional acquisitions that closed since we met last time. And so you can, I guess if you're really got a good keen eye, you can see where those are continuing to change the color of tiles on the map. We're just shy of 350 parcels, so we're still making some good progress there. We are continuing to negotiate on a lot of them on the diversion channel, especially that southern half of the diversion channel. We do have some purchase agreements that have been signed since this report was prepared, and I guess continue to make progress there. Those negotiations, I think as I've reported in the past few months here, some of them are sort of reaching a point where we're having to step into the formal negotiation process. And so they're getting some official letters from the Cass County Joint Board, and I guess that some property owners are fully expecting that, and it's just one of the steps we're going through. In other situations, we're continuing to have some real good dialogue with property owners and trying to reach a settlement. So a lot of negotiations happening, and I think the next 6 or so months will be pretty critical to get all of these channel acquisitions as well as the acquisitions for the Southern Embankment Reach 1 done on time. So, maybe a couple other things just to point out on page, let's see here, page 15. We have the wild rice control structure. As you are aware, the Corps of Engineers has awarded the contract for the wild rice control structure. They had a base package for their bid and then an alternate package or an option package. The option package was put together because we were still working to acquire 2 parcels. And so on the middle section of page 15, you see a blue and a purple box. I'm happy to, report here that we do have purchase agreements signed with both of those property owners, and we will be closing before the April 17th deadline. Barring any catastrophes, we will be closing before the April 17th deadline, so that will enable the Corps to award their option contract for that segment of the wild rice project. So that's good news. Maybe the other thing that I would just point out for your awareness, and it probably hasn't hit this report yet, but over the last month or more, we have been negotiating with a property owner who his land is impacted not only by the footprint of the embankment, but he also owns several parcels in the upstream mitigation area where we ultimately will need to buy flowage easements. we had been approaching that property owner because we were hoping to use some of his property for a haul route for the I-29 road raise project. As the negotiations continued, we proposed basically a comprehensive package to him for acquiring all of the land rights that we need for the project, including the flowage easements, including the temporary construction easements along the road raise, including the footprint for the southern embankment that crosses a few of his parcels. And we were able to negotiate to a point where I think both parties were happy, so the Cass County Joint Board and the property owner were happy with the acquisition. And so we've started to buy some flowage easements, I guess, is the point of all that. And the flowage easements that we acquired were within the boundaries that the Crown appraisals report had spelled out for us a couple years ago. So I think that's kind of an interesting development, and hopefully that provides some springboard for us as we get going into more of those acquisitions.
When will we be doing the rest of the flowage easement studies? Because I know that that's given a lot of folks some angst about what to expect.
Yeah, so on the flowage easement study, as you recall, Crown Appraisals did complete their phase 1 study back in 2018. And since that time, the project has changed significantly. And so we will be needing to, I guess, negotiate, work with Crown to, I think, not only update phase 1 to reflect the current project as we know it, as well as update any sales that have occurred over the last few years. And then we will, I guess what our anticipation is, we'll work with Crown to do what's called phase 2 flowage easement valuation. And in that phase 2 study, they will define a flowage easement value for all of the parcels in the upstream mitigation area. And the reason why we're sort of hesitant to start that yet, or why we haven't yet, is that there's, where exactly are the impacts and where are they not? And, we can sort of look at lines on a map, but if you're in an appraiser, you need to know with absolute certainty what you're appraising. And so until we get the final sign-off from FEMA on the Clomer model, and until we get the final sign-off on our mitigation plan from the Office of State Engineer, we would essentially be at risk of having Crown start and stop and have rework. And so we're basically working to get the FEMA approval of the Clomer model and the state engineer's approval of our mitigation plan. Once we have those pieces, along with the Corps of Engineers' final design of the southern embankment or final alignment of the southern embankment, we'll be able to engage Crown and have them get going on the phase 2 study. So I'm hoping that we're able to do that here later this spring. I anticipate it'll probably be a year's effort for them to complete their full valuation. There's something like 300 or 400 parcels in the staging area. And there'll be some different rules for the valuation of parcels on the North Dakota side versus the Minnesota side. And we'll have to make sure that they're addressing all of those nuances appropriately.
So most of those, though, even though we don't have the final Clomers, 80–90%, probably more, we know which ones are going to be affected. Especially the ones that are closer to the embankment. Why can't we just get started on it?
Well, I guess if we're confident with our hydraulic model and that it's not going to change based on FEMA's review, perhaps we could. If we're confident that the state engineer is going to approve our mitigation plan as drafted, I guess those are some things. Again, if we proceed with the flowage easement study now, there's a risk that the appraiser would have to restart or stop and restart some of their effort if we don't have certainty around some of those parameters.
And maybe I'm just not understanding this, but we're just talking about what the exact area is, and the question is the fringe areas. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So if we looked at, there's the vast majority of the part that's really going to be inundated. We know that for sure is going to need a flowage easement. So if we just drew a line around that and told them to get that, and then based on the Clomer and FEMA and all of these other things later on, we could add the rest when we get that more defined. I just suggest this because I know when we've been out talking to people, that is just really troubling to them, not knowing what a flowage easement's going to be worth. And maybe our answer won't make them happy anyway, but I don't know, it's just, I think the fear of the unknown, people just like to know.
Madam Chair, if I may, I agree 100% with you. And we are constrained as far as being able to do certain steps before others. But what I might suggest, and Eric, maybe this is a possibility, that instead of waiting for all of the flowage easement evaluations at one time, would it be possible to get certain parcels prior first, maybe appraised first? But we still, in order to appraise the flowage easement, we need to have, some specifics about each property, and each property is going to be different, and each flowage easement is going to be different. It will depend upon the depth of new floodwater on the property and where that is located. And so it's a little bit more complex because each parcel needs to be treated separately and appraised, and that value needs to be created. I think we know with some level of certainty now what we're going to be required to mitigate to, but until we get approval from the Office of the State Engineer on our mitigation plan and the Clomar, we don't have anything set in stone. So I think Mr. Dodds is a little worried about having the appraisers set loose and then something changes and they'd have to start from scratch all over again. But I think we are expecting the Clomar and the mitigation plan to be approved sometime in the March timeframe, to have both of those in place. And then at that time, I believe Mr. Dodds, the flowage easement evaluation study would begin. I guess my question would be, could the study be developed in phases instead of just one large study for all parcels and delivered at one time?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I've had some discussions with Crown about, getting going again, and I can certainly pick up those conversations and ask that question about, sort of staging in the deliverables. So yeah, that's a good approach.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? All right, continue.
Maybe just a couple other things I might point out for your attention on page 13 of the status report. Environmental monitoring areas. As you're aware, we've been working to obtain either easements or rights of entries to allow the Corps to do environmental monitoring. This is biotic and geomorphic monitoring this spring. Those efforts are ongoing and we're making some progress, but as you can see in the graphs, there's not as many green boxes as we would hope for. And so because of that, we are, on the North Dakota side, we've started to, I guess, our priority would be to secure an easement. But where a property owner has, all sorts of questions or resistance to an easement, we've diverted and said, well, could we at least get a right of entry to allow the monitoring to occur in 2020? Making sure that they're aware that we'll come back to them at some point and still request the easement for long term, but for 2020 purposes, going to pursue just the rights of entry. And so those rights of entries have been presented to property owners. We've been giving them a couple weeks to review those. Many of these property owners have signed a right of entry in the past, and so the right of entry is maybe more familiar or comfortable to them. And some of the property owners, we had to use court action to get those rights of entries in the past, and it's anticipated we're going to have to use some court action again to get those rights of entries on the North Dakota side.
So if we're paying for a right of entry, how does that affect what we're going to pay for an easement?
Historically, we have not paid for rights of entries.
Okay.
On the Minnesota side, we've been working to secure rights of entries. This is more of the first round of monitoring, and so we've been working with the MCCJPA and Clay County to get those rights of entries on the Minnesota side, and there's already some activities going on in court. I guess we've met with some property owners and hoping that those processes move forward. But again, that's all driven by the timeline of trying to get the access in place so that the Corps can do their survey work starting this spring. It sounds like they need to have assurance that we'll have enough of these accesses in place for them to do their contracting action. And so that, the clock is ticking, and I guess we've been in close coordination with them on that.
So this should be pretty easy, but obviously it's not. Are we not communicating this to them, or, I mean, because it's a good thing for the environment, it's very non-invasive. My understanding is most of it is gotten off the banks, and, you don't even enter the land. So, it's ensuring that we're not harming the environment as time goes on. So from what I understand, if you're a landowner, this is a good thing. But I get that if you're not happy with the process, you're suspicious about it, you're not too eager to sign this. But what can we do to make this easier?
Well, I think a lot of the, again, we had, 8 or 9 sort of informational meetings, invited to hundreds of property owners to come out to these informational meetings and hear about the program. And I think the people that, were able to attend those meetings probably appreciated the information, and they understand exactly what's going to be expected. Again, as you pointed out, most all of the traffic will be on the waterway itself, and very limited traffic up on people's property. I think what really has caused the concern, there's probably a handful of things, but the permanency of an easement is something that people have been concerned about. And so originally it was a perpetual easement. We have narrowed that back to be a 50-year easement, and so we felt like that was kind of hopefully a good concession. 50 years is still maybe a long time, but all the scientists at the Corps felt that they needed an easement for at least a 50-year period to make sure we're appropriately monitoring the biotic and geomorphic conditions. There's been a handful of other provisions that have been changed in the easement document to address property owner concerns. And so I think we'll get there. It's just, there's a lot of property owners here, as you can see by the numbers. And it's, unfortunately, it's taking some time, and the clock is ticking, and so we have to take these sort of other steps.
Yes, Commissioner.
There has been some discussion at the Cass County Joint Board level that they're compensating the people for easements, but they may have to increase the level of compensation in order to entice the property owners to sign. It's at least being talked about.
Yeah, currently, we've established we've used the county minimum $750 for a permanent easement as the payment mechanism for these easements. And, if we end up with a whole batch of these that we have to go to court for some reason, perhaps that money would be better spent trying to entice more property owners to sell. And of course, if we've already paid you $750, we'll have to come back and make sure you get the appropriate amount if the decision is made to increase it. So,
Do you use these types of easements in other ways?
no, this easement is exclusively for accessing the property to do biotic and geomorphic.
But does the counties, or the city put easements on properties like this for other things? I'm just, is this 750, is that a reasonable number?
Well, there's a lot of properties have, an easement for the road on the rural areas. There's utility easements that are, I think, probably quite a bit more intrusive than what we're asking for in all reality. The utility easements provide the opportunity for the power company to come out there anytime, whenever they want or need to, to inspect their pipe or power lines or whatever that might be.
What do they get for that?
I don't believe that they pay much, if anything, for those.
Well, for our levee easements in town, typically it's about 90% of the land value that the easement is actually encumbering. But that's basically restricting them from being able to use their land how they can today. You know, we're putting a levy on it, and that's all that's ever gonna be on that property. So that's what historically the appraisers have deemed as about 90% of the land value. But again, that's here, this is, you know, every 5-6 years, someone walking on their property for a day.
And
Nowhere near
Have we
apples to
looked around the country for other, you know, we looked in Minnesota?
we've asked the Corps if they've used these other places, and they have not, and so we're pioneering a bit here in terms of this form of easement. We have looked at other types of easements in Minnesota. They have some trout stream access easements, for example, a few other examples, and, you know, we did math out, you know, the expected number of occurrences of people walking on somebody's land, kind of mathed all that out and figured, you know, what's that value worth from a sort of temporary construction type easement in that context. And the math works out to be less than the 750, and so we felt that, well, 750 is the county minimum, that seems appropriate, but
Personally, I'd like to make sure that we can back up the 750, if that's the number, you know, how did we arrive at it? That's just my personal view, I may be way in here. But I struggle when, you know, when property owners talk to me about the project, you know, the number comes up a lot, and what this project is costing us ultimately, and is costing the taxpayer. And I think that, you know, I know you're talking to landowners, and we want to be very, very fair to everybody and making sure everybody's compensated, but, you know, the bank vault is not just open and flowing with cash either. And so, you know, we need to make sure that, you know, these is taxpayer dollars we're spending, and, you know, if 750 is the number, 750 is the number. If that's not the number, let's find out what it is and be sure that we can justify it, because, I mean, I don't know what it's worth, but it,
well, and
you know, it's gotta be
ultimately,
fair.
we will, you know, undoubtedly there'll be some property owners where we won't be able to negotiate the easement. And so our plan for those is to hire an appraiser and have them do an appraisal assignment. This is not your everyday appraisal assignment either, valuing these easements. And so we've had some discussions with legal counsel and with some of our land experts about, you know, what would be the appraisal assignment. And that's something we will be working on sooner, probably later this spring, I guess, as we, you know, try to wrap up the rates of entry effort and spring back into the easement pursuits. So.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, continue.
I don't really have anything else that I wanted to share on the status report. I guess the rest of it, you know, happy to answer questions, but for your records, I guess.
And do you anticipate anything to be coming to the county at any point soon?
I would say not soon, but I would be shocked if we don't have some that go to the county, unfortunately. We have a growing number. I believe the Cass County Joint Board has authorized the start of formal negotiations on 86 different parcels. And we've sent formal letters out on 34 of those. So there's still a bunch of processing and double checking on the 40-some that are authorized but haven't been sent. And so some of those, when we, you know, send the formal letter, there's continued discussion and continued negotiations where we're hoping to reach a settlement. In other situations, you know, the two sides are just stuck, unfortunately. And so I suspect there'll be some of those that do end up going to the county commission. Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be an opportunity then to get a handle on what the valuation really is.
No, not necessarily. I believe the county commission would be asked, well, the Cass County Joint Board.
Well, no, I don't mean by the county,
Oh,
but I mean, that would
court.
be a step in getting to a judgment
Yep.
whereby you would have
Yeah,
a number,
yes, absolutely. And so,
even though it would be an expensive way to get to a number.
right, unfortunately.
you know, considering how many parcels we have, it would seem to me that that is inevitable, that,
Yeah, and in some regards, thankfully, we've got a good court system that we can lean on if we need to. And so if we do end up going to court and going through all the rigor of the statutes, then, yeah, ultimately the court would decide what the appropriate value is. We'll have our appraisal, and that'll be our basis, and the property owner will have their information and maybe a second appraisal from their side, and so.
And yet, in the meantime, we'll spend more on that process than the easement's worth.
Well, I think you're probably right. I mean, we're talking a little bit about buying land and fee title here as well, but you're probably right that unfortunately we end up spending money and, the attorneys end up probably taking some of that away, whereas, maybe in hindsight we could have just paid it to the property owner. But as a government entity, I think, as Commissioner Sherling has talked about, we need to be conscious about how much we're budging above the appraised value as well. And so finding a balance point there is really kind of our goal.
My sense is there's, of course, an expectation that we'll protect everybody's rights and properties, but there's also a reality to how much are we going to spend. I'd rather see mitigation and easements and all that be our highest priority instead of all these lawsuits we're in.
Right.
And spending how much on lawsuits. It'd be so much better for everybody to agree that those funds were better invested in the people impacted and knock off these delays. So that's my priority, is get to the people and invest there at the ground level.
and I think that's that's the case with the vast majority. But there are going to be a handful of people that just, there's no amount of money in the world that is going to compensate them for this. And that's just their reality. And so we have to figure out, and probably have to go through the court system to find out what that magic number is. Because for some people, there just isn't a number.
We're also faced with some time constraints
Yes.
that have to be lived within in order to proceed with the project. So that forces you to do things that you might not otherwise be favorably inclined to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
I might just add that I think it was last month we reviewed the sort of acquisition philosophies document from our mitigation plan, and one of the key tenets of that philosophies document is to use court action or eminent domain as a last resort. And I think that that's something we're holding very true to. We don't rush out to use eminent domain. We try to negotiate in very good faith. Sometimes the timeframes get in the way, and we're sort of forced to go down that route. But it's something that's very conscious for the Cass County Joint Board and my team working on this, that it's certainly not a first option by any means. So.
Anyone else? Okay, well, I'm not sure where we're at here. Number 5, ag impacts.
Yeah, I wanted to give the board or the committee here a little update on some things that we've been working on. As you're well aware, the project will have impacts on the ag community upstream of the metro area. And, the discussion about flowage easements. Flowage easements are one of the mitigation tools that we'll use to mitigate those property owners. But flowage easements are the requirement that the federal government requires of us to obtain. But we have committed to some additional ag mitigation. And, there's a few things in the works that I guess I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware of and up to speed on. The North Dakota State University Agribusiness and Applied Economics Department is working on an update to the ag risk study. They originally did that study for the Diversion Authority back in 2016, I believe it was. And then the legislature asked them to expand that study in 2017. And now with the reconfiguration of the project, Plan B, NDSU is just about wrapped up. And so probably by March, we'll have an updated version of their ag risk study. The original version basically identified and quantified the cost implications for delayed planting in the staging area. In delayed planting caused by operation of the diversion project. And so if the project operates most of the time, the spring flood comes and goes before regional planting starts. But there are some situations when we get a late flood and the planting date would be delayed. And if you're familiar with agricultural processes, delaying the planting ends up in a reduction of yield at the harvest time, and so there's a revenue loss potential there. And so the NDSU group is really working to quantify that, and again, they should be wrapped up with their study. I am anticipating asking them to give a presentation to the Diversion Authority, and I guess we can decide whether that's to the full board and maybe invite the committee there. I guess we can figure that out, but probably in the March timeframe. The other thing that we've been working on, and I don't have a ton of progress on this yet, but if you recall, several years ago, we contracted with an outfit called Watson Associates, and they're really an expert on crop insurance. The Diversion Authority, as part of our mitigation plan, has committed to developing a summer flood crop loss program. And so this program would be in place and basically provide a revenue source for producers in the event that the project has to operate in the summertime on growing crops. If that event were to happen, which is extremely rare, but if it were to ever happen, those producers would be ineligible for federal crop insurance. At least that's the assumption. And therefore they could be in a really bad situation with the devastation of flooding on their growing crops. And so to compensate or mitigate for that risk, the Diversion Authority has committed to establishing a summer flood crop loss program. And this would essentially be like a rider that the insurance market would go out and offer to producers on an annual basis, just like they do every year signing up for their regular crop insurance program. So we're working with Watts and Associates to get a proposal from them to put some more details and sort of help formulate that exact plan. They have to go through some agency approvals, risk management agency and whatnot. And so Watts is sort of the, I guess, expert in that field, and looking forward to working with them. At the same time, Roger Olson on the joint board, and I guess you always know Roger, has been advocating that we should also explore a prevent plant program. And so right now, the intention is that the flowage easement would compensate for prevent plant risks. But Roger believes that this is something we maybe want to explore a little bit further, and Watts is framing out kind of a concept of how we might put together a prevent plant, sort of a crop insurance rider as well. And so those pieces, I don't have any results of any of that yet, but those pieces are in the works, and I just kind of wanted to make sure the committee was aware of those activities.
When do you expect to have any results?
I was hoping to have the proposal from Watts by this meeting, but it looks like we're going to get that before the February meeting, and so we'll bring that proposal forward to the February meeting. And once they get under contract, I suspect it'll be a few months of effort for them to frame that out, maybe 4 or 5 months, I suppose.
Eric, I'm just curious, and Madam Chair, if I might, while we focus on risks, do we also focus on any potential benefits? And not that we're going to send a bill to impacted farmers, but it's conceivable to me that an event could actually replenish some topsoil into the region and give them a little bit of a noteworthy benefit. It's not all risk. No, maybe I'm off the deep end on that, but you might look to see if there are any benefits agriculturally that we can at least note.
Yeah, good comments. And, as we've met with, whether it's the NDSU research team or actual ag producers over the years, some of the farmers on the Cass County Joint Board, for example, a lot of them have given anecdotal comments that, their most productive land is along the river. It's the land that gets flooded. And I remember hearing some producers say that after the '97 flood, they were able to get on their flooded land before they were able to get on the land that wasn't flooded. And, you know, it took the frost out or something. And so there's all sorts of these anecdotal comments. I think being able to quantify that has been probably a challenge, but anecdotally, we've certainly heard those comments. I think if you want to get kicked out of the Christine Bar, you can go bring that up, and they'll probably kick you out in a real hurry. But so there's, I think those are valuable comments to consider. But I don't know that. I guess my gut feel is we, as a diversion authority, we probably shouldn't be advocating for those potential benefits either. And so it's, but
Just noting it.
yeah.
There's also the potential for some passive drainage outside the channel. You know, when you just have a normal year, you know, might provide you getting water off your land sooner, but this is just a side benefit.
Madam Chair, if I may. Commissioner Strand, I think you bring up a good topic, and we're fortunate to have a world-class agricultural university right here in our community. And Eric and I have been in talks with the NDSU and other departments as well about what type of additional research that we could bring some of the folks from NDSU in onto this project to really dive in at a very technical, specific level on some of these unknown issues and try to somehow understand them and get our arms around those. And we're anticipating having a meeting with NDSU in the next month to just kind of brainstorm research topics that could be applicable, of benefit to the diversion and of benefit to NDSU in their research mission. So just so you know.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Then, Eric, you finished with that?
Yeah.
Go on to formal negotiations then?
Yeah, I think I maybe covered this earlier, but just as a recap, the Cass County Joint Board has authorized the start of formal negotiations on 86 different parcels. We have sent 34 formal negotiation letters out to property owners, and that effort we're continuing to review the other details and appraisals, and get those letters formulated on the rest of those. But we have had 4 acquisitions approved or agreements reached after we've started that formal process, and so I guess not real surprised by any of that, but just wanted to share that information with you.
Great, thank you. And the Cass Joint Water Resource District update.
The Joint Board, I guess, continues to meet twice a month, and they're a pretty active group. I think the last meeting was the shortest one we've had in 6 months or more. It was an hour and a half, so I think we're happy to kick us out the door when we got done with that, but otherwise we're making good progress.
Okay. And the Minnesota.
Well, our last meeting was the longest one we had. But, yeah, but it's, we're making progress. We're just really getting started, getting our feet wet in this whole process, but we continue to work on the right-of-way for the needs for the soil borings along the southern embankment. We continue to work with obtaining the easements for the biogeo. We've had some success there in both of those instances. You talk about flowage easements, I think we actually have some already done deals on flowage easements on Minnesota properties. So we are, we're moving along. I don't know if our legal has any, based on the county's recent actions, is there a timeline there at all that we? That's pretty much it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Short report for a long meeting.
MetroCog.
Good afternoon. MetroCog is continuing to work on the recreational component along with our project partners. We had a project review committee meeting on January 16th, where we looked again at some of the recreational concepts that have been developed over the months. Again, kind of looking at some of the nodes, looking at the bikeway network, looking at potential winter trails, character segments, and vegetation. Ultimately, it'll be a good roadmap if and when funding is available for some of these concepts and if conditions allow. Another thing that we've continuing to look at is the governance structure. I know at the last meeting we talked about potential partners and lead agencies and MetroCog's potential involvement as a lead agency. We're still looking at that. We're looking at different scenarios, looking at potential limited partners, our partnership potentially with North Dakota Parks and Recreation and with the different park districts here in the community. With that, we are going to be sitting down with the Fargo, West Fargo, and Horace park districts here in the coming week to better gauge their potential future involvement. Another thing that we did share at this project committee meeting a couple of weeks ago was the benefits case. It was kind of the first time we really started to look at some of the health benefits, potential visitor spending, annual visitation to potential future recreational components. Also looking at that kind of that visitor recapture, so visitors may be going over to Minnesota for recreation needs, looking to see if we could recapture some of those visitors for a future recreational component along the diversion. Also looking at business attractiveness, what some of those numbers and metrics would be. We still have a little bit of work to do with that. A couple things that came out of this meeting was to look at if we can actually put some numbers for potential job creation in the community, and also to see if there's any potential student attractiveness to our area universities and colleges. And one last thing that we did talk about at this meeting very briefly was just future branding. So we did toss around a couple of potential names for future recreational components. With that, some of the next steps that we did talk about, again, kind of we'll be looking at that benefits case a little bit more. Again, looking at this governance structure and how that might pan out as for a preferred governance structure. And we do have in our schedule to potentially have some additional public involvement activities here in March. And then just as an update, we would look to have a draft report in May and then hopefully a final approval in July. So more information to come. Happy to take any questions at this time.
Questions, anyone? Thank you very much, very exciting.
Thank you.
Okay, any other business? Joel, you have anything for us?
I do not, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, thank you, Eric, for all your hard work, and Dan, the joint board, and Commissioner Campbell with the Minnesota board. I know it's a difficult task, and it's a huge task, bigger than most people truly understand, so I appreciate all the hard work on it. Our next meeting will be February 26th at 3 o'clock. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.